Hi again. Kenneth Scott Latourette, page 284 of A History of Christianity, the chapter The Byzantine Continuation. This is the final stages of the Christological controversy, and here's a word I did not know before I read Latourette, Monotheletism. That is mono, T-H-E-L-E-T-I-S-M. Latourette says the lack of unity among Christians, and especially between Monophysites and the majority, Monophysites being those who believed that Christ had but one nature, and that was divine nature, therefore played down his humanity. That was rejected by Orthodoxy, and the fight in the 7th century is principally about that. Was Orthodoxy, as represented by the Council of Chalcedon in 451, correct in dealing with Christ and insisting that Christ had two natures, divine and human? The Monophysites denied that. So he says the lack of unity among Christians, and especially between Monophysites and the majority, which Justinian had failed to eliminate, continued to pose a major problem to both church and state. The emperor after emperor and emperor after emperor wrestled with it. The issue became urgent when, in the 7th century, Arab invaders bearing a new religion, Islam, began their conquests. The emperors believed it imperative to have Christians and the empire present a common front against the invader. A fresh approach was made towards bringing Orthodox and Monophysites together, but far from attaining its goal, it brought another wave of controversy. The new approach was suggested by the Patriarch Sergius of Constantinople to the Emperor Heraclius, and found support in the writings, then relatively new, which were attributed to Dionysius the Areopagite. These had said that the selfsame Christ and Son works divine and human deeds by one divine-human operation, or energeia. For the time, the statement that Christ acted through one energeia brought about union in Egypt of Orthodox and Monophysites, but it drew attack. Sergius, in an attempt to bypass a divisive debate, suggested that the discussion of whether Christ acted through one or more than one energeia, which we might relate to the word will, and I think he does that right here. The discussion of whether Christ acted through one or more than one energeia be dropped, but that surely all would agree that in Christ there was still only one will, that is thelema. To this, Pope Honorius, I think that would be better pronounced Honorius, so it's H-O-N-O-R-I-U-S, yes, Honorius or Honorius, to whom Sergius had written, assented, seemingly backed by the bishops of the two most eminent sees in the Church. In 638, the Emperor Heraclius issued an edict containing the views of Sergius, forbidding the discussion of one or two energies, and declaring that Christ had one will. This seemed to win the assent of the legates of the successor of Pope Honorius, but in 641, a later pope came out against Monotheletism, the statement that there was only one will in Christ, and declared that his had really been the view of Honorius. Subsequent popes also affirmed that there were two wills, divine and human, in Christ, and this in general was the conviction in the West. It was argued that if Christ is truly man, as well as truly God, he must have a human as well as a divine will. To deny him a human will is to deprive him of his full humanity. It was, of course, held that the divine and the human will were always in accord and never in disagreement. Since the discussion was a menace to the unity of the Church and was producing fresh division and weakness, in 648 the Emperor Constans II forbade further debate on the questions of one or two energies and of one or two wills. In defiance of this order, in 649, Pope Martin I held a synod at Rome which declared for two wills in Christ, condemned the Patriarch of Constantinople for taking the opposite view, and also came out against the imperial edicts of 638 and 648. For what he deemed the Pope's contumacy, the emperor had Martin brought to Constantinople as a prisoner, treated him cruelly and exiled him to the Crimea. There Martin died. The Greek monk Maximus, known to later generations as the Confessor, who had been an able and outspoken opponent of Monotheletism, was imprisoned, tortured, mutilated, and exiled. By this time, most of the provinces where the Monophysites were strongest had been lost to the Arabs, and apparently from a desire to bring peace in such of the church as remained within the Roman Empire, the successor of Constans II called what is usually known as the Sixth Ecumenical Council. This met in Constantinople in 680 and 681. It pilloried the advocates of the Let's do that again. This met in Constantinople. It pilloried the advocates of the Monothelite position, or Thelite, naming among them several Patriarchs of Constantinople and Pope Honorius as instruments of the devil, and came out flatly for two wills and two energies in Christ, as concurring most fitly in him for the salvation of the human race. In its distinctive findings, the council declared that it was following the suggestions of the reigning Pope, Agatho, and of the synod of 125 bishops which had been held under him in Rome the preceding year. The Sixth Ecumenical Council is generally said to mark the end of the centuries-long debate over the relation of Jesus Christ to God, and over the fashion in which the divine and human were to be found in him. To be sure, the issue was revived by a Byzantine emperor early in the 8th century, and a large group in the Lebanon, the Maronites, held to Monotheletism until the 12th century, when they made their peace with Rome. Moreover, the Nestorians and various branches of the Monophysites continued their independent existence. Yet by the 8th century, Arianism, the first major dissent on the issue, had largely disappeared. And for the main bodies of Christians in the West, and for those in the East who had their chief center in Constantinople, the discussion had ceased, and a common mind had been reached. The positions defined in the course of the debate have since been deemed final by the churches, which together embrace the large majority of Christians. Roman Catholics, Orthodox, and most Protestants hold to them. The various branches of the Monophysites cling to the findings of their spiritual ancestors of the 5th and 6th centuries. It has been mainly among some Protestants, and they, small minorities of that wing of the faith, that the ancient questions have been raised afresh, and answers given which differ from those of the first 6 ecumenical councils. Then he has a subhead: the western and eastern sections of the Catholic Church continue to drift apart. Although for them agreement had been reached over the nature of Christ and the relation of the divine and human in him, the western and eastern sections of the Catholic Church were drifting apart, the one looking to Rome and the other to Constantinople. A stage in the separation was a council held in Constantinople in 692. It was summoned by the emperor, but while the East regarded it as a supplementary to the Sixth Ecumenical Council, and really a continuation of that body, its membership was purely from that section of the empire. It dealt with matters of organization and discipline rather than doctrine. Its enactments have been regarded as binding by the portion of the church led by the See of Constantinople, but have never been fully accepted by Rome, or by the section of the church which has looked to Rome for guidance. The council reaffirmed the position of Chalcedon, that the See of Constantinople shall enjoy equal privilege with the See of Old Rome, and second after it. In open opposition to Rome, it permitted the marriage of deacons and presbyters, forbade the Roman custom of fasting on Saturdays during Lent, prohibited the representation of Christ as a lamb, and was customary in the West, and ordered that Christ be depicted in human form. The final division had not yet come, and East and West were usually in communion with each other. Indeed, while the then Pope refused to assent to the decisions of the Council of 692, a few years later another Pope signed them with some qualifications. Yet a gulf was appearing and was widening. Next time, the coming of the Arabs and Islam. Put in a link to A series we did, 4 videos actually, Babel in Brooklyn, how the Watchtower repackages paganism, and this deals specifically with a book about Arianism. See you soon.